Imagine a world where life was so tough, so cruel, that people actually ate their own children just to survive. This might sound like something from a scary movie, but it was real. In the 14th century, Europe faced a series of disasters that turned people's lives upside down. This was a time when the weather got so cold that the Baltic Sea froze over, and rains fell so heavily that crops failed, leading to widespread famine. People were so desperate that they resorted to unimaginable acts just to stay alive. But this was just the beginning of a century that would be marked by war, disease, and political turmoil. Let's dive into this fascinating, yet terrifying period of history. In the early 14th century, France was the center of the Western world. It was a land where knights were famous for their chivalry, and the king was known as the most Christian king. The French were respected for their learning, their devotion to the church, and their elegant manners. Foreign nobles came to France to learn how to be proper gentlemen, and kings and knights from all over Europe gathered at the French court for tournaments, parties, and romantic adventures. The French language was so prestigious that it was spoken by the nobility in England, Flanders, and even in the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily. It was used in business, law, and literature, and even Marco Polo wrote his famous travels in French. The University of Paris was the most renowned institution of learning in Europe. It had over 500 teachers, and more students than anyone could count. Great minds like Thomas Aquinas and William of Ockham taught there, and the university was so powerful that it often clashed with the church and the Pope. The university's charter gave it special privileges, making it independent from both the king and the church. This made it a place where new ideas could flourish, but it also led to conflicts with religious authorities. Despite France's glory, the 14th century was not kind to its people. The weather turned colder, leading to shorter growing seasons and failed crops. This was the beginning of what historians call the Little Ice Age. The cold weather meant that people couldn't grow enough food, and this led to famine. In 1315, after months of heavy rain, crops failed all over Europe, and people began to starve. The famine was so severe that reports spread of people eating their own children, and even the bodies of hanged criminals. Diseases like dysentery spread quickly, making the situation even worse. The famine was just the start of the troubles. In the first few decades of the 14th century, 4 major events shook the foundations of European society. The first was a conflict between King Philip IV of France and Pope Boniface VIII. Philip wanted to tax the church, but Boniface said no. The Pope issued a decree saying that no one could be saved unless they followed the Pope's authority. This led to a bitter dispute, and in 1303, agents of the king attacked the Pope in his summer home. The Pope was freed, but he died soon after from the shock. This event marked a turning point in the relationship between the church and the state. The next major event was the move of the papacy to Avignon, a city in southern France. A French pope, Clement V, decided to stay in Avignon instead of going to Rome. This was seen as a move to make the church more obedient to France. The papacy in Avignon became known as the Babylonian exile, and was a time when the church became more focused on money and power. The popes sold church offices, indulgences, and other religious favors to raise money. This led to widespread corruption and loss of respect for the church. The third event was the suppression of the Knights Templar, a powerful military order that had been founded during the Crusades. King Philip IV accused the Templars of heresy and other crimes, and had many of them tortured and executed. This was a shocking event that showed how far the king was willing to go to gain power and wealth. The fourth event was the rise of the Pastoureaux, a group of poor shepherds who rebelled against the church and the nobility. They believed that the church had become corrupt, and that they were following a more pure form of Christianity. The Pastoureaux attacked churches and nobles, and their rebellion spread across France and into other parts of Europe. All these events contributed to a sense of crisis and instability in Europe. People were suffering from hunger and disease, and they no longer trusted the institutions that were supposed to protect them. The church, which had been the center of medieval life, was losing its authority, and the nobility was facing new challenges from the growing power of kings and the rise of new social classes. Despite these challenges, life in the 14th century was not all doom and gloom. The nobility, especially, continued to live in luxury and splendor. They wore elaborate clothing, held grand tournaments, and enjoyed the arts. The Sire de Coucy, a powerful noble in France, had a vast estate that produced timber, grapes, grain, and fish. His castle was a symbol of his wealth and power, and he held elaborate ceremonies to show his authority over his vassals. The 14th century was a time of great change and upheaval. It was a period when old ways of life were being challenged, and new ideas were emerging. People faced incredible hardships, but they also showed remarkable resilience and creativity. The century was marked by both tragedy and transformation, and it left a lasting impact on the world we live in today. Understanding this period helps us appreciate the complexity of history and the enduring human spirit.